Very important show today. We just kind of did a little breakdown of what we woke up to on Saturday. And really, for me, everything changed. I have so much anxiety, I should say, for the future and what's to come of that. But to do so, I thought we should bring in a very special guest today to really give us a great perspective about what's going on. I've been wanting to talk to him for quite some time. Norman Finkelstein is here with us today. Norman Finkelstein is a political scientist and activist whose primary fields of research are the Israeli Palestinian conflict and the politics of the Holocaust. He received his PhD in political science from Princeton University. He has held faculty positions at Brooklyn College, Rutgers University, Hunter College, New York University, and DePaul University, where he was an assistant professor from 2001 to 2007. His books include The Holocaust Industry, Reflections on the Exploitation of Jewish Suffering, Gaza, An Inquest into Its Martyrdom, and most recently, I'll Burn That Bridge When I Get to It, Politically Incorrect Thoughts on Cancel Culture and Academic Freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Norman Finkelstein. How you doing today, Professor Finkelstein?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
You know what? There's no one else I'd rather have than you today, and I'm so glad you joined us because I think there's so much confusion to what's going on in Israel, Palestine. If you talk to a lot of people out there who aren't in our political bubble, they really don't have a clue to what's going on. And if you look at our mainstream media, they seem even more lost. I haven't seen one politician or candidate out there who's really spoke up for the rights of the Palestinian people. So, I mean, I wanted you to come here today, not only to talk about solutions and where we are and what's going on, but maybe you can give us a little brief history lesson to bring us up to date to why we are where we're at today. I don't think a lot of people understand how Israel was formed, but maybe you can do that. And please, Professor Finkelstein, I know you've probably had almost every single pushback on every single subject from, well, Jews lived here for quite some time. They had a right to that land. So if you have an opposing view in your mind that you've already pushed back against, please bring in that point of view so we can really get an understanding of why we are where we are at today. Go right ahead.
Well, I want to set forth the basic facts about the situation in Gaza. It's hard to separate it out from the whole history of the Israel-Palestine conflict, but I don't think we have enough time to do the whole history. I want to focus for the moment on what's obviously an imminent catastrophe in Gaza, and so I want to focus on that history. Before I get to the history, I want to situate Gaza, the basic facts. Every time you hear the word Gaza, these are the facts that should leap to the forefront of your mind. Number one, 70% of the population of Gaza consists of refugees and descendants of refugees from the 1948 war, in the course of which Israel was created, and about 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from the state of Israel. Roughly 290,000 of those 750,000 ended up in Gaza. So the population of Gaza, which now stands at approximately 2.1 million people, 70% of that population are refugees or descendants of refugees. Fact number two, whenever you hear the word Gaza, remember, 1/2 of the population of Gaza consists of children. So whenever you hear these diabolical plans being cooked up by Israel, bear in mind the objects of those plans are 1 million or more children. Fact number three, Gaza is among the most densely populated places on God's earth. It's more densely populated than Tokyo.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Gaza, believe it or not, its dimensions are 5 miles by 25 miles. What does that mean to your average listener? Well, for me, it means that Gaza's width is the circumference of the seashore where I jog every morning. It's 5 miles. Its length is shorter than a marathon. A marathon is 26.2 miles. The whole length of Gaza is 25 miles. That's Gaza. Now, what's the situation in Gaza? It's impossible now for me to trace it back to 1948 when the conflict began, or at least the conflict climaxed in 1948 with the creation of the State of Israel. I'm going to fast forward to 2006. In January 2006, there were parliamentary elections in Gaza and the West Bank. And those elections were urged on Gaza by, among other parties, the United States. Jimmy Carter went to Gaza to monitor the elections. He declared that the elections were honest and fair. As a consequence of those elections, Hamas was elected, or Hamas achieved a majority of votes in the election. Immediately as Hamas came to power in completely honest and fair elections, which were urged upon the people of Gaza by the United States, immediately as Hamas won the elections, Israel imposed a brutal economic blockade on Gaza. That blockade was followed thereafter by sanctions imposed by the United States and the EU. What does that blockade mean in practice? So forgive me for repeating myself. Unless these basic facts are understood, everything that's happened in the past couple of days will be a mystery. So let's bear in mind, we're talking about 1 million children. We're talking about a population that's overwhelmingly refugees. Israel imposed this blockade on Gaza. 1/2 of the population, and this has been consistent since 2006, because I've studied the literature or the human rights reports and the humanitarian reports from 2006 to the present. We're talking about roughly 20 years, 2 decades. And if you look at that period, half the population of Gaza is unemployed. Among the youth, the figures are 60%. If I'm not mistaken, that's the highest unemployment rate of any area in the world. Number 2, nobody, barring the rarest exceptions, nobody can go into Gaza and nobody can leave Gaza. Nobody can go in. Nobody can leave. When you look at those young men who breached the gates of Gaza this past couple of days ago, most of those people, if not all, had never seen anything in their lives except that 5-mile wide by 25-mile long strip of land. This was their first time free. Now, having said that, it's not altogether a surprise that even the UK's Conservative Prime Minister, David Cameron, he described Gaza as, quote, an open-air prison. Now, one of Israel's leading sociologists, he taught at the Hebrew University, he passed away early before the blockade was imposed on Gaza. That's before 2006. In a book he wrote in 2003, he described Gaza. I'm holding up the book now and I'm reading from page 169. The book is entitled Politicide, Ariel Sharon's War Against the Palestinians. And Baruch Kimmerling, who's the author, he describes Gaza as the largest concentration camp ever to exist. The largest concentration camp ever to exist. So, the bottom line is that the population of Gaza has been trapped. And in half the cases, believe it or not, they were born into a concentration camp. From their birth to their childhood, to their youth, to their adulthood, the only thing they've experienced is a concentration camp. Currently, half the population is classified by international humanitarian organizations. It's classified as suffering from, quote, severe food insecurity. Now, here is the question. What were the people of Gaza supposed to do? I'm going to give you a frank, personal admission, and I'm not proud of it, but I want to place this current situation in context. I first became involved in the Israel-Palestine conflict in June 1982, when Israel invaded Lebanon. I ended up writing my doctoral dissertation on a topic related to the Israel-Palestine conflict. And then I ended up devoting the whole of my adult life to that conflict. 40 years. And come 2020, even I gave up. I started to write about other subjects. I thought the situation was hopeless. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of guilt stirred up inside me because I realized I was abandoning a people trapped in a concentration camp. Now, I don't want to be emotive. I don't want to be dramatic. However, it behooves me to say both my parents were in concentration camps during World War II. My mother was in Majdanek concentration camp. My father was in Auschwitz concentration camp. And I was riddled with guilt that people facing circumstances like my parents, and I had abandoned them. So, if even I had abandoned them, not making any claims to sainthood, but simply the fact that I invested 40 years of my life in that conflict and finally had to resign myself to the fact that nothing could be done. So, does it really surprise you? Is it really a shock that a couple of days ago, the people of Gaza, most of whom, let's bear it in mind, most of whom were born in that concentration camp.
Mm-hmm.
They were born into it. Does it really shock you that they would do something desperate to break free of that concentration camp? And who dare criticize whatever tactics they employ? I am not approving it, but I am not disapproving it, because I don't know what I would do if I had been born into a concentration camp and spent 20 years of my life there.
Yeah. I've seen you in videos talk about what a lot of these IDF soldiers have done to these children, these kids, and taking out eyes and limbs and whatnot. But I want to stay with Hamas for a second, because I think this is important. Because there's a lot of people right now, especially when it comes to our government, you know, our lawmakers, they immediately go to Hamas. They single out Hamas and they say Hamas is a bunch of terrorists, they're awful, and that somehow manufactures consent for the United States to supply Israel with as much weaponry as as we can, and then for them to go after and with no compassion whatsoever bomb buildings and schools and hospitals. I mean, I don't think we see a month go by without a Palestinian baby getting killed or shelled or shot. But I want to talk a little bit more about Hamas, because there's a little bit more nuance to the situation. Now, first question I have is, from what I said before you came on, right when we were introducing you, a lot of people are kind of framing this as Israel versus Hamas. I think Hamas was just one small faction of this, or maybe a big faction of this, but I would say this is Israel versus Palestine, that there are other groups that have joined with Hamas and whatnot because their backs are so against the wall that they have nothing to lose at this point. And I also said that this was inevitable, that this was bound to happen. I mean, it had to happen because, you know, like I said, their backs are completely against the wall. There's been a blockade going on there for quite some time. Israel has not stopped expanding their settlements. So for me, this was inevitable that it was going to happen. So the first question is, number one, is it right to say it's just versus Hamas, or is it more of a bigger resistant coalition going on in Gaza and Palestine? And number two, we have this video here from Ron Paul. When Ron Paul mentioned on the floor of Congress that Hamas was actually started by Israel. I'm going to play this really quickly, and then we'll get your answers.
What's happening in the Middle East, and in particular with Gaza right now, we have some moral responsibility for both sides in a way, because we provide help and funding for both Arab nations and Israel. And so we definitely have a moral responsibility, and especially now today, the weapons being used to kill so many Palestinians are American weapons, and American funds essentially are being used for this. But there's a political liability, which I think is something that we fail to look at, because too often there's so much blowback from our intervention in areas that we shouldn't be involved in. You know, Hamas, if you look at the history, you'll find out that Hamas was encouraged and really started by Israel, because they wanted Hamas to counteract Yasser Arafat. And you say, well, yeah, that was better then and served its purpose, but we didn't want Hamas to do this. So then we as Americans say, well, we have such a good system, we're going to impose this on the world. We're going to invade Iraq and teach people how to be Democrats. We want free elections. So we encourage Palestinians to have a free election. They do elect Hamas. So we first indirectly and directly through Israel help establish Hamas. Then we have election. Then Hamas is dominant. So we have to kill them. So it just doesn't make sense. During the 80s, we were allied with Osama bin Laden, and we were contending with the Soviets. It was at that time our CIA was good.
All right, we'll leave it at there, Professor Finkelstein. But the two questions: number one, is this a war that now Israel has declared is directly against Hamas only? And second, is it true also that Israel started Hamas as to push back against the PLO and Yasser Arafat? Can you give us a little insight to these statements over here?
It is factually correct what Ron Paul said, that Israel encouraged in various ways, for example, by not exerting as much repression on Hamas as it did on the PLO back in those years, in order to create a counterweight to the PLO. I don't want to get involved in that history, because to some extent, even though the point he made is historically valid, it's, if you don't mind my saying so, it's water under the bridge.
No.
It's happened. So we're going to just accept it as a fact, though as a historical point, he is correct. Let's talk about several things about Hamas. Bear in mind, as I continue, I do not defend Hamas. That's the responsibility of the Palestinian people to choose their leaders. If that economic blockade had not been imposed and Hamas failed in its leadership responsibilities, presumably it would have been voted out. Hamas would have been voted out in the next election. The democratic process was never allowed to the Palestinian people. Hillary Clinton, who was a senator at the time, when the elections occurred in Gaza, this was her response. I'm quoting her. "We should have made sure that we did something to determine who was going to win." That's the American notion of democratic elections. We should rig them so the people will choose only the candidates that we want. Now, having said that, it is true, because we do not in any way want to distort the historical record. The truth is on the side of the Palestinian people, and the truth is on the side of the people of Gaza. It is true that up until the election of 2006, Hamas didn't recognize Israel as a state. However, once it came into power, it was undergoing an evolution which quite possibly, I'm not going to say certainly, it would quite possibly would have resulted in a leadership willing to negotiate with Israel. They were never given the chance. Now, you say, is it Hamas or is it the people of Gaza? I am not going to say they are one and the same. However, I will say that who fertilizes Hamas? Who foments the support for Hamas? Who are the young people who join Hamas? If they were given an opportunity in life, if they were given a chance, if they were able to breathe, I don't know if they would have joined Hamas. Most of these young people are at the point where they're willing to just sacrifice their life because the situation is so hopeless. So I can't separate Hamas from the people of Gaza because the blockade creates a synthesis and assimilation between the people and Hamas. They have no other options. They have no other choices. And this is the question. This is the question that we must constantly ask ourselves. What were their options? Allow me, since you wanted me to fill in for your audience, to look at the history. Now, periodically, Israel launches these brutal, merciless, criminal assaults on Gaza. There are so many of them that literally I can't remember all the names, but at least two might be familiar to your listeners. In 2007, Israel launched Operation Cast Lead. It went from December 26, 2008 to January 17th, 2009. Amnesty International published a report on that, a large report on that assault. They called the report 22 days of death and destruction. Israel killed about 1,400 people, including 350 children. It demolished, it flattened 6,000 homes. Then I'm going to skip the 3 or 4 other assaults and go to 2014. Israel launches Operation Protective Edge. It kills 550 Palestinian children. It demolishes 18,000 homes. Peter Maurer, he was the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross. He went to visit Gaza after those 51 days of death and destruction. And now I'm going to quote him. I hope your audience will bear in mind. We're talking about the president of the International Committee of the Red Cross, which means he's seen many war zones. Indeed, his job is to visit war zones. And this is what he had to say after Israel's Operation Protective Edge. Quote, I've never seen such massive destruction ever before. I've never seen such massive destruction ever before. And who is this destruction being visited upon? This unprecedented destruction, who is it being visited on? It's being visited on a population that's overwhelmingly refugees and which is half children. That's who the heroic IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, inflicts the most massive destruction that the president of the ICRC ever witnessed in his professional career. Now, You might say, justifiably, you can talk about options. Well, why haven't the Palestinians tried nonviolence? Why haven't the people of Gaza tried nonviolence? But they did. In 2018, they launched the Great March of Return. And at the beginning, it was wholly nonviolent. What did Israel do? Well, there is a very good human rights report that was issued by the UN describing what Israel did. Does the audience want to know? I'll tell them. According to the report, Israel targeted medical personnel, targeted. It targeted journalists. It targeted people with physical disabilities. What were the snipers targeting? They were targeting kneecaps and below. So, does it shock anyone? Is it really so bewildering that after attempting a nonviolent resistance, medical personnel were targeted, journalists were targeted, people with disabilities were targeted? Is it really a shock that it deteriorated and ultimately failed in its goals, in its objectives, to end that brutal, inhuman blockade of Gaza? So, let's go back to the basic question. What were they supposed to do? Benjamin Netanyahu, he announced that he was going to compress, reduce the Palestine question by negotiating all of these agreements with neighboring Arab countries, and then the Palestine question would vanish. What does vanish mean? What does vanish mean? It means the Gaza ghetto, the Gaza concentration camp, will just continue along its way, and the people left there to die. That's the goal, to leave the people there to die.
Yeah.
Well, the people refused to die. And now Israel has finally announced, and it's not me, because I know there are some people on Twitter and some people in this social media who are rushing to silence anyone who makes comparisons between Israeli conduct and Nazis. So, as we proceed, I hope the social media police will bear in mind it's not me, it's Israel's defense minister who has just announced that they will not allow any electricity. They will not allow any water. They will not allow any food. They will not allow any fuel into Gaza.
Yeah.
Now, bear in mind, Benjamin Netanyahu announced yesterday that Israelis should be prepared for a long war. If you put those two statements together, now I ask the social media police to bear in mind, it's not me. I am simply quoting from the Israeli leadership. If you put those two statements together, what it means is there will be no food, no water, no electricity, and no fuel
Yeah.
allowed in Gaza for a long time.
Yeah.
So, what do we conclude from that? I conclude that the Israeli government has finally figured out the final solution to the Gaza problem. That's what I conclude, I infer from the information that's being broadcast by this government.
Yeah. Complete and total genocide.
And endorsed not only by President Biden, not only today endorsed by former President Barack Obama, endorsed by the whole squad, so-called, except for Cori Bush, or the squad members who have issued statements so far, except for Cori Bush. And it has to be said that Bernie Sanders has gone along with it.
Yeah.
Now, during his campaign, Bernie Sanders did say the blockade of Gaza has to be lifted. He did say it, and I want to acknowledge it. But right now, he is a moral disgrace. He disgraces himself, and I don't say this with any glee. I say it with disgust.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's often said, he doesn't flaunt it, but when asked, he said that a large part of his family was wiped out in Poland during World War II. A large part of his family was wiped out in Poland during World War II. And yet, not only has he not criticized President Biden's sending of arms promiscuously to Ukraine, in which they land in the hands of Nazis tracing their descendancy back to World War II, but now he's lent his name to the genocidal assault on the people of Gaza. It is a disgrace. It fills me with such disgust at how cowardly he is or has become.
I got it. Go ahead, Doc. Go ahead, Professor. I have his comment up here. I just wanted to show you really quickly. I absolutely condemn the horrifying attack on Israel by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. There is no justification for this violence, and innocent people on both sides will suffer hugely because of it. It must end now. So that was his, yeah.
No justification. No justification. People immured, interned in a concentration camp for 20 years.
Yeah.
And they're trying to break out. There's no justification for what's happening. No.
Yeah. At least Professor Finkelstein, he didn't say unprovoked, though. He didn't say unprovoked like everybody else. Unprovoked. I'm like, are we to pretend that there's no blockade going on in Gaza? Are we to pretend that Gaza citizens, Palestinians, aren't murdered on a regular basis in Gaza? It's mind-blowing. Please continue.
The only exceptions, because they're honorable exceptions, the only exceptions I am aware of are, first of all, Dr. Cornel West, who issued a statement yesterday, which I found perfectly reasonable. And there are a couple of Israelis, Gideon Levy, for those of you who have an opportunity to read his statement today, and a real person of the left, Claire Daly.
Oh, yeah.
She issued a statement yesterday, and it warms you, even in the midst of all this torment and anguish. It just warms you in its humanity. She said, Ursula von der Leyen, preacher in the EU, she said, we all stand behind Israel. And Claire Daly said, "What are you talking about?
Yeah.
You're an elected official. We haven't taken a stand on it." And then she said, quote, speaking directly to Ursula von der Leyen, "If you have nothing constructive to say, just shut up." And that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And that's how I feel with Bernie. And that's how I feel with AOC. And that's how I feel with Ilhan Omar. You have nothing constructive to say. You just say what will buy you brownie points. Then just shut up.
Yeah. There's also two other people that we have to mention too as well, and we'll get back to them because I do have a few questions right here too as well, because I think we have to tackle this now. Everything you've told us on what some of the other politicians have said, but the two other people that have really been persona non grata by me now are RFK and Tulsi and what they said, and we'll get into that in a second. But I have a couple questions because it's very important, because we have statements like this. Now, last week I praised Representative Matt Gaetz for what he did in the House. It's something I wanted the squad to do, and I thought it was awesome because there were a lot of things that I really wanted that he was pushing for. Single item spending bills, which is really important. The stopping of aiding and funds to Ukraine, really important. Some of the other things I weren't crazy about, but I did praise him for it. Now, he says this the other day: "I'm closely monitoring the terrorist attacks by Hamas in Israel today. Hamas has no goals for prosperity. They only bring ruin and terror. Israel has every right to defend itself. We are praying for peace and safety for everyone in Israel today." I guess the Palestinians don't get any of that peace.
Well, you know, I promise you, a vast majority of people do not think of Gaza as the prison that it is. Like, they don't think of it that way.
I know they don't know.
It sounds like North Korea, when they say about North Korea, how bad those concentration camps are.
Yeah.
And that 3 generations of a family have to be born there.
Yeah.
Except, you know, with a lot more space and less people in it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are movies like Gaza Fights for Freedom and other movies that have broken through, that have shown what goes on in Gaza. But I mean, Israel, the Israeli lobby has a very strong control on our media. They don't let a lot of this information out. And like Professor Finkelstein said, if people would just understand and know the truth.
Well, let's say it's not even a prison. It's just a really bad ghetto. I mean, at best, you could say, I guess, if you want to be dishonest about it. Has that system worked? Why did this happen if that was the right way to handle it?
Yeah. This is something Marjorie Taylor Greene said. "We stand with our great friend and ally, Israel, as they declare war against Islamic terrorists. Over 1,000 Iran-backed Hamas terrorists invaded Israel, slaughtering Israeli citizens right at the end of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. Make no mistake, this is Islam's holy war, and their ultimate goal is to wipe out all of Israel. America will not allow it. How much of the $6 billion Joe Biden gave back to the Iran-funded this attack against Israel? President Trump would have never given that money to Iran. May God protect Israel." Now, the reason why I brought this up is because
she just mentioned it's probably Ukraine and Afghanistan weapons. What are they?
Well, here's the thing.
Weapons?
We've heard Marjorie Taylor Greene, we've heard Matt Gaetz talk about why are we funding Ukraine? They're not the 51st state. Well, my question to you, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz, is Israel the 51st state? Because we give them $3 billion in aid. And Professor Finkelstein, this is very scary right here. And I brought this up because these two particular lawmakers are considered part of the populist right? The Trump movement, the MAGA movement, whatever you want to call it. They're a little bit different than the rhinos and the establishment, Nikki Haley's and Lindsey Graham, which we'll get to them in a second. But this talk that Iran, that Iran is backing this with no proof whatsoever. In fact, I believe the Iran statement was that they had no idea what was going on. They're not involved with Palestinian affairs. Yes, they stand in solidarity with the oppressed people of in Gaza and the Palestinians, but they weren't part of this planning. This right here scares me, Professor Finkelstein, because it seems like it could spin out of control into World War III. A lot of people don't know their history, and they simply just go behind this whole, oh, it's Hamas, they're terrorists. Now, I was going to ask you, if they are terrorists, if they are a terrorist organization, or are they freedom fighters? But the nuance you provided, I think, says a lot. What would you say to Matt Gaetz and Marjorie Taylor Greene if they use this excuse that Israel has a right to do what they have to do because they're wiping out terrorists. Because I don't understand when they start speaking this language, what's the difference between a terrorist and a murderer? Israel murders a lot more citizens, a lot more Palestinians than Palestinians murder Israelis. Please go right ahead.
First of all, we have to bear in mind that even if what you're saying is true, not you, I'm speaking now to Matt Getz and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Let's say everything you say is true, okay? Now, Israel has announced that in order to cure this problem, to correct this problem, they are going to commit a genocide against the people of Gaza. That's the announcement, not by trivial figures, not by marginal figures, by the defense minister and the prime minister. Israel has embarked on a genocide in Gaza. So I would ask Matt Getz and Marjorie Taylor Greene a very simple question. Do you support starving to death 1 million Gaza children? Do you support that? That's Israel's, it's not a secret plan. We don't have to infer the plan. We don't have to connect any dots because there are spaces in the reasoning. It's right out there. So I ask Matt Getz, I ask Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I ask all the other people who you're going to bring to my attention now, or cite for me. Do you support? Because you're giving blanket support to Israel. That's what you're doing. You're giving blanket support to Israel. Barack Obama said today, we support Israel in dismantling Hamas. That's what he said. Now, Israel has announced, Mr. Barack Obama, Nobel Peace Prize winner, Israel has announced exactly how it's going to go about dismantling Hamas. How is it going to go about it? What is it going to do? It's going to deny the people of Gaza any food, water, fuel, or electricity. That's what they're going to do. So I want to know, Mr. Obama, do you support the extermination of the Palestinian people in Gaza? Because that's what it means in practice. When you give blanket support to Israel, you are giving blanket support to the extermination of the Palestinian people. So you have to accept responsibility for your words. Secondly, if you end the blockade of Gaza, which you have to under international law, because under international law, the blockade constitutes a form of collective punishment.
Mm-hmm.
So it's illegal under international law. If you end the blockade of Gaza, from my point of view, there's no reason to suppose that the people of Gaza are like every other person on God's earth, and that they will seek out all sorts of opportunities to improve their lives. Now, you might say, oh, that sounds so rosy, and we're talking about Islamic terrorists. Yeah, I could be wrong. But then the people of Gaza will have the opportunity, as they did in 2006. They voted out the Palestinian Authority, and they voted in Hamas. And there was no reason to suppose that if they had been allowed to carry on democratic elections in an ordinary life, that they simply would have said, we don't want Hamas anymore because they're messing things up for us. They weren't given the chance. The day after the results of the election, Israel immediately imposed, and then the EU and the US went along with, the brutal blockade on Gaza. They were never given the chance. So I would say the main concern now, because you spoke to me earlier, not that I'm trying to end it, but I want to, convey something practical to your audience or our audience. That is, the main goal has to be to end that illegal, that criminal, that immoral, that godforsaken blockade of Gaza, and let the people live finally. Let them breathe finally.
Yeah.
And then we see what happens.
I would hope that something like that could happen, and I think that's a great suggestion. But we have politicians, Professor Finkelstein, like this. Nikki Haley, listen to what she has to say.
But let's step back, because I want the American people to kind of take this in for a second. Just imagine that here the Israelis woke up and communities were bombarded. Families were murdered. Women and children were taken hostage, dragged through the streets. The elderly were taken. All of this has happened in front of everyone, on top of thousands of rockets that hit Israel. This should be personal for every woman and man in America. Why? Because when they did this surprise attack, when they took these hostages, when they murdered these families, they were celebrating. And what were they celebrating? They were saying death to Israel, death to America. This is not just an attack on Israel. This is an attack on America, because they hate us just as much. And what we have to understand is this is the reason that we have to unite around making sure our enemies do not hurt our friends. America can never be so arrogant to think we don't need friends, just like we needed them on 9/11. That's why Ukraine needs us when Russia's doing this. That's why Israel needs us when Hamas and Iran are doing this. And I'll say this to Prime Minister Netanyahu, finish them. Finish them. Hamas did this. You know Iran's behind it. Finish them. They should have hell to pay for what they've just done.
So, Professor Finkelstein, that is not the only person, because we have this gentleman over here, Lindsey Graham, another person who is not only saying, this is about terrorists coming in, and, the same lines again from Nikki Haley. Their freedom is tied to our freedom. This is not an attack on Israel. This is an attack on us. But then we have other establishment Republicans that are drawing lines in the sand when it comes to geopolitical matters, talking about, well, we're going to make sure that we hold Saudi Arabia to account. They can't just say whatever. They have to condemn Hamas. Even Blinken was waving his finger at the Chinese as if he was going to get them to go along with it. But listen to what Lindsey Graham has to say, and then I would like your opinions, because this, once again, this type of rhetoric and this manufacturing of consent, especially from a controlled media, when a lot of our information has not been able to get out, has not been able to been, publicized. I mean, I know there's shadow bans on anybody who speaks out against the state of Israel. That's been like that for quite some time. I think the first people to ever get censored on the intranet were people who were speaking on behalf of the Palestinians and against Israel. But listen to this real quickly and then give me your statement, because how do we push back against this rhetoric when you say, let's lift the blockade? We have guys like this saying we can't do that because then they're going to just commit more murder. Listen.
So I've been on the phone all day to the Mideast, and I've told our allies and people with connections to Iran, what I would do, I would tell Iran that if Hezbollah attacks Israel, we're going to come after you, the Iranians, and have a coordinated effort between the United States and Israel to put Iran out of the oil business by destroying their refineries. There are 4 major refineries in Iran. They're fixed targets. If Hezbollah attacks Israel, I would make Iran pay a heavy price.
I don't know if you've heard, Professor Finkelstein, of the USS Liberty, but it almost seemed like that particular attack when Israel fired upon an American vessel, killing 30-something odd sailors, then turning around and saying, oops, it was a mistake. I don't think it was any mistake whatsoever. I think they wanted to sink that vessel and draw America into war, the same way that Lindsey Graham seems to be trying to draw, along with Israel, they seem to be wanting to draw America into war against Iran. But we know with Russia's relationship with Iran, all hell could break loose, and the next thing you know, it's World War III. Please, your opinions.
Well, first of all, the Tulsi Gabbard. I want to get to the question you just mentioned. It's very important. But first, Tulsi Gabbard.
Should we put up her statement for you real quick?
You just read it. Just heard her, so it's
Okay.
fine.
Gotcha.
So, first of all, what Israel witnessed on that morning, Palestinians witnessed many times.
That was Nikki Haley, by the way, we played.
Excuse me, Nikki Haley.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I don't have I'm not wearing my glasses.
My bad.
Nikki Haley. So, the Palestinians have witnessed that many times what Israel witnessed on the morning a couple of days ago. Each of those operations, what was the result? We have huge numbers of human rights reports. Each time Israel entered Gaza, Operation Cast Lead, Operation Protective Edge, and many operations in between, they targeted homes. They targeted hospitals. They targeted mosques. They targeted children. That's all voluminously documented. I'm talking about thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of human rights reports, which I've read. Thousands of pages documenting attacking children, targeting mosques, targeting schools, targeting ambulances, targeting hospitals. 350 children killed in one operation, 550 children killed in another operation. So, Nikki Haley, if you're so concerned about what Israel experienced on that morning, where is the concern for the fact that the people in this concentration camp have constantly, repeatedly had to bear witness to the same magnitude of atrocities? Well, actually, much smaller. The Israeli atrocities were much smaller. The atrocities committed against Israel were, as of now, much smaller than what happened in Gaza. The second thing is, it's a simple question for me. It's called responsibility of your words. She said, finish them off. That's her words.
Scary.
Now, who is the them? She says it's Hamas. Okay. Israel has said, announced how it's going to finish off Hamas. It's announced its plan. The war plan is out there. It's going to deny the 2.1 million people of Gaza any water, fuel, food for a long time. So Nikki Haley is advocating, in effect, the extermination of the people of Gaza. As to Lindsey Graham, there seems to be, I think, a lack of, there's such an arrogance and bravado, and so completely lacking any sense of how quickly, if any normal person acted on the statements that Lindsey Graham is making.
Yeah.
What will happen? I think that there's not even, I don't know. The whole thing would just spiral out of control. Do you know why Israel has not attack Hezbollah in Lebanon? It wants to. You know why it is not?
Because it got its butt kicked in 1982?
Oh, it had its butt kicked in 2006.
Yeah, more recent.
2006, too, right? Yeah.
However, that's not the only reason. It's reported that Hezbollah has amassed. Now, I don't know if the numbers are right. I'm just telling you, reported. They've amassed something on the order of 100,000 missiles. And those missiles, the head of Hezbollah, Syed Nasrallah, has said they can and they will reach Tel Aviv. And there are certain targets in Tel Aviv, if they are hit, and Syed Nasrallah has already mentioned them by name, if they are hit, you're going to have a catastrophe on a scale that's completely unimaginable. So, when this imbecile starts making statements like that, anybody who cares about humanity, including Israeli humanity, anyone who has a jot of feeling for any humanity would tell Mr. Lindsey Graham what Claire Daly told Ursula von der Leyen, and I'll quote her: "If you have nothing constructive to say, shut up."
I like how fast he brought up oil.
Yeah.
I mean, like he in the same sentence he had to bring up, and it's something we're gonna get their oil.
We're gonna render them enabled to sell oil. All right, so we have the populist right we talked about. We talked about Bernie Sanders and some of the squad. We just mentioned some of the hardcore neoconservatives. Now we have two politicians that have kind of showed their true side. In 2020, Professor Finkelstein, I supported Tulsi Gabbard because I thought foreign policy-wise, she was the best politician out there. In other words, I knew she wasn't perfect. She'd kept quiet a lot about her thoughts on Israel-Palestine. But when it came to, when she went to Syria and met with Assad and talked about possibly pulling out there, we were pushing her, the campaign, to recognize a little bit more what's going on in Latin America. But then she had this comment the other day, and she just said this here as well. I'm going to show you. Andrew, the United States must stand with Israel in the face of this terror attack by Islamist terrorist group Hamas. This is the latest example of the greater war being waged by both Sunni and Shia Islamist jihadists throughout the world. This should be a wake-up call to leaders everywhere that Islamist jihadists are the greatest short and long-term threat to the safety, security, and the freedom of the American people and people throughout the world. I strongly disagree. I think the greatest threat is American foreign policy that drops bombs on a regular basis. Now, here's the other one. This is RFK. And this is really, really hard because I thought I was kind of analyzing the situation and saying there was still a tactical gain if we took RFK despite his position on Israel and Palestine. I don't know if you know this, Professor Finkelstein. It was me who went up to New Hampshire and asked him right after he had taken down some tweets from Roger Waters about his stance on Israel and Palestine. And what was so surprising to me is after he had pretty much stated that he was going to stand by Israel unequivocally, I had to say, and the Palestinians, so he would answer the rest of the question. It was upsetting, but I had looked at it as maybe, I don't know, a third rail where I can say there's so many other things we can gain from RFK that we have to take this loss. But this right here, this was so just disheartening. This ignominious, unprovoked, he said unprovoked, and barbaric attack on Israel must be met with world commendation and unequivocal support for the Jewish state's right to self-defense. We must provide Israel with whatever it needs to defend itself. Now, as president, and this is the part that really makes me upset, I'll make sure that our policy is unambiguous so that the enemies of Israel will think long and hard before attempting aggression of any kind. I applaud the strong statements of support from the Biden White House for Israel in our hour of need. However, the scale of these attacks means it is likely that Israel will need to wage a sustained military campaign to protect its citizens. Statements of support are fine, but we must now follow through with unwavering, resolute, and practical action. America must stand by or ally throughout this operation and beyond as it exercises its sovereign right to self-defense. The reason why this statement here is so disheartening and why I don't think I can ever support him is because, number one, it's pretty much giving the green light for carpet bombing, genocide, and starving these people out. Secondly, he's talking about unwavering support once he becomes president, that no matter what Israel does. So if this spins out of control and Lindsey Graham gets his way and we attack Iran, Russia gets involved to protect Iran, is RFK, if he was president, is he going to stand by Israel and provoke World War III? This was very, very hard to deal with. And the fact is that this statement here, no matter what, there's no solution here whatsoever. There's no suggestion of a solution. This here did it for me and a lot of other people, too, the other day. I was not even concerned or wanted to hear his announcement today that he was going independent because of this. And these two particular candidates, Professor Finkelstein, are looked upon as the most, the best foreign policy candidates that were ever out there. Tulsi in 2020 and RFK now. Your thoughts on these statements that have just come forth?
Well, I'd like to look at this question of the right to self-defense, Israel's right to self-defense. So, I would like to ask the question, do concentration camp guards, does a state which contains a concentration camp, if the inmates attempt to break out, would it constitute some sort of violation, moral or legal, of law, such that the state has the right of self-defense against those confined in a concentration camp? Now, you might say, and you're perfectly legitimate in saying, but civilians were killed. And apparently, we still don't know the facts. We have to wait for the Human Rights Report investigations, apparently in large numbers. And I have to say, it doesn't please me, obviously. And I'm not happy about that fact. And I'm not going to give a but or a however. I'm simply going to state the facts. In our country's history, we have come to celebrate people like John Brown. In fact, during the Civil War, one of the songs that the Union troops sang in the Civil War was John Brown's body is a moldering in the grave. The God above in heaven is looking kindly down. John Brown's body is a moldering in the grave. John Brown, let's be clear. I don't know how much of the history you know. I've studied it somewhat, not as much as I would like. And if God allows me maybe 10 more years, I will read more on it. John Brown, I say this in respect. He was a complete fanatic. He was a religious fanatic. He was, brace yourself, he was a jihadi.
Yeah.
Oh, it's absolutely true.
Yeah, Frederick Douglass asked him not to do that because it was going to set things back.
He believed that God had sent him as a messenger to end slavery. He did. He was God's messenger. He had that fanatic's gleam in his eyes. When he went to fight in bloody Kansas, he took hostages in the course of the fighting. He killed them. He killed them. John Brown is celebrated. John Brown's bodies are moldering in the grave. Glory, hallelujah. There were many a slave rebellion, even in the United States, where a lot of civilians were killed. Now, I'm not saying I'm happy about it. I'm not saying I approve of it, but I will say, at the risk of incurring a lot of wrath, just as I won't approve it, I won't disapprove of it. End the blockade of Gaza, and then we'll see how things proceed. But until you end that blockade of that concentration camp, it would be an utter and total betrayal of my own family's martyrdom to deny the right of those inmates, those infant inmates of that concentration camp, to liberate themselves and to free themselves from that tyrannical that's been imposed on them.
I have some of the things that you were mentioning before, because I think this is very important to talk about, because you've said several times, these aren't my words, these are the words of Netanyahu's government on what they plan on doing. Netanyahu's announcement on the attack. Citizens of Israel, we are at war, not in operation or in rounds, but at war. This morning, Hamas launched a murderous surprise attack against the state of Israel and its citizens. We have been in this since the early morning hours. I've convened the heads of the security establishment and ordered, first of all, to clear out the communities. They have been infiltrated by terrorists. This is currently being carried out. At the same time, I have ordered an extensive mobilization and that we return fire of a magnitude that the enemy has not known. The enemy will pay an unprecedented price. In the meantime, I call on all the citizens of Israel to strictly adhere to the directives of the IDF. We are at war, and we will win it.
I want to clarify a point there. There were 2 points. That one that you just heard, and secondly, Netanyahu made a statement that the Palestinians should leave from the areas.
I was going to get to that. Yeah.
Let me get to the first one, the one that you just played.
Gotcha.
I don't want to sound too technical about this, because often legal technicalities just confuse more than they enlighten. However, here I think the point is important. He said Hamas attacked the state of Israel. That is incorrect. Gaza is part of Israel. Israel has de facto annexed the West Bank, annexed Gaza. Under international law, very simple, every one of your viewers will understand it. Under international law, what distinguishes an occupation from an illegal annexation, it's very simple. An occupation is temporary. An annexation or an illegal annexation is permanent. Those territories were occupied, meaning the West Bank and Gaza, a half century ago. A half century. It's permanent. That being the case, Gaza could not have attacked the state of Israel. Gaza is part of the state of Israel.
Yeah.
What we witnessed a couple of days ago was a slave revolt. The slaves rose up in revolt against their masters. That's what happened. So don't let these technicalities about our state is under attack. No. Gaza, the West Bank, by international law. And I know the law. I teach the law. I've studied the law. Under international law, Gaza and the West Bank are part of Israel. What we witnessed was a slave revolt.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying I approve of it, but I won't say I disapprove of it. Then, in the course of slave revolts, historically, many innocents are killed.
That was awesome. And before you get to your second point, which I was going to bring up because I have it written down here, if Netanyahu is stating that he's going to hit the Gaza Strip hard, and he says people should leave, but they can't go anywhere, isn't he talking about genocide? And this
He's
is
saying
the
go in the
defense.
sea, like the thing
Like
to
where
say
you gonna
about.
go? You can't. You're not even allowed to go. You're not even allowed to exit that way. But this is the defense minister saying we're fighting human animals, referring to Palestinians, and vowed to attack accordingly. I'm going to play this, and then please, Professor Finkelstein, give us your thoughts on that whole statement of him saying, you know, pretty much it reminds me of when George Bush was like saying in Iraq, we're going to hit you, so get out of there. Like, where are you going to go? But this is even worse because they're not allowed to technically leave.
Not technically, period. They're
Period.
not allowed to leave. That's the problem.
Period. Yes.
That's the problem.
Yeah. Let's play this, and we'll get your further get your opinion on it. We are putting a complete siege on Gaza. No electricity, no food, no water, no gas. It is all closed. We are fighting animals, and we're acting accordingly. That's the defense minister.
Sieges.
Well, we have Professor Finkelstein. We can ask him, Professor Finkelstein.
Is Yemen what we just got done helping with?
I want to just emphasize, for the sake of your listeners, I said at the beginning, if you understood certain basic facts, everything becomes blindingly clear. When he's saying animals, we're fighting animals. Half of those animals are children. Half of the animals are children. That's who they are instituting these sanctions against. They are attempting to subdue through starvation, through lack of water. They're trying to subdue a population that's 1 million children. And I really do wonder, I'm serious now, if that fact, that simple basic fact, if every day our media pointed out, hey, do you realize 1 million of the people in Gaza are children, half the population? I really wonder whether the American people would go along with these statements that are being made.
They wouldn't. I don't think people know it's a concentration camp like that. I really didn't realize the population was that high until you said it.
How dense it was?
Because, what is Israel the size of New Jersey? So my town I grew up in on the shore is probably about that size.
Yeah.
It had 30,000 people in it. 5 million people and no one can leave?
Yeah.
Like that's like literally concentrating people in a camp.
Yeah.
My late mother occasionally spoke out on the question of the Palestinians. And one of the things she said, I quoted in the very first book I wrote on the Israel-Palestine conflict back in 1996. She was once asked about the Israel-Palestine conflict, obviously because she's Jewish, she survived the Nazi Holocaust, and because I had been speaking and writing on the subject. And she said, quote, "What crime did the people of Palestine commit except to be born in Palestine?" Now, I would say, whatever you want to say about Hamas, I may not agree with you, but for argument's sake, I will concede. What crime did the million children in Gaza commit except to be born in a concentration camp? What crime did the million children in Gaza? Million happens to be a sacred number for Jews. Because of the 6 million Jews who were exterminated during World War II, 1 million were children. So,
Yeah.
that million number, and it's 1 million children in Gaza. It's 1 million children. And now they're openly boasting about wiping them out. I don't think the American people, during the war in Vietnam, the Secretary General of the UN was a fellow named U Thant. He was from Burma, very decent guy. And during the war in Vietnam, he once said, the first casualty of war is truth.
Mm-hmm.
And then he went on to say, I do not believe if the American people were aware of the true facts of this war, they would support it. Now, it is true. He said that, I think, in 1965. It took a long time before the truth about the war seeped out. But once it did, there really was a lot of genuine opposition to that war. And I do believe that where the basic, I don't mean reading even my books, which can be very dense, just the basic facts, were they known, I don't think people would go along with it. And that's why I leapt at the opportunity to appear in your program. I don't want to toot my own horn, but on the other hand, I've never seen any point in false modesty if acknowledging your competence can be of a service. I very much doubt there's anybody in the West who has more scholarly knowledge on the Israel-Palestine conflict, or Gaza in particular, than myself.
Mm-hmm.
I devoted a large part of my adult life. And yours is the first program in a very long time that I've been allowed on to reach a reasonably sized audience.
Yeah.
And it's impossible, especially now, amidst this hysteria. And I'm not saying, incidentally, I'm not saying that a lot of the visceral, the instinctive revulsion, I'm not even saying it's invalid. I can understand it. But even that instinctive, visceral revulsion has to be placed in the context of what has happened to Gaza, not since 1948, because as I said, it all begins when approximately 300,000 refugees from Israel land in Gaza. But not even to go all the way back there, but just in your lifetime and in my lifetime. I'm talking about since 2006. It's 18 years ago. That's not so long. Just that history. If they only knew the past 18 years, I think I can accept the revulsion and the outrage, but I still believe people are capable of both feeling that revulsion and outrage and still saying, I kind of get it. I kind of get it.
People don't know it's a prison.
Yeah.
They don't know it's a prison.
They don't.
If you think of it as a clear, like in a prison riot,
yeah,
that's what you describe. And when you hear a prison riot, like, it's revolting.
Slaves don't attack; they revolt. Right? That's exactly.
But nobody thinks of it as a prison.
I know.
Like that.
Well,
and that's the key to it because it makes a lot of sense when you think of it that way.
Well, we have a controlled media apparatus that is controlled by the Israeli lobbyists. They have a lot to say when it comes to things. So we're in a race right now to get the truth out there before it gets any worse, because like you said, Professor Finkelstein, the number one casualty of war is the truth. Well, I don't want it to get to war, right? We're trying to stop and educate people what's really going on there, so there will be some pushback. And I've noticed some pushback online. There has been a little, comforting things to see. All right, some people are starting to get this and they're going to push back. Please continue, Professor Finkelstein.
Well, either he's a pathological liar or he's completely demented if Netanyahu really believes they could go somewhere. How
It's-
could
They know people don't know. Like, I think people kind of think, I swear to God, that, oh, I mean, they just have to do like checkpoints. They can probably leave.
No,
I don't
no,
think
no.
people understand.
They can't.
Like, and I've known pieces of it for a long time, but I never thought of it. I mean, I remember when the blockade happened, the list of stuff people couldn't have, like
Yeah.
musical instruments. It seemed like a bit much at the time, but you know, time flies. Much
Yeah.
like Guantanamo that's still open.
Yeah.
Just kind of forgot about it.
at one point, hard to believe, but facts, as the British adage goes, are stubborn things. At one point, the Israeli officials actually calibrated. I hope you listeners will listen. They calibrated the number of calories that should be allocated
I remember that.
each Gazan to keep them just above starvation. To keep them just
Wow. Yeah.
You know,
That's almost German precise.
unfortunately, I didn't say. I should say, fortunately, I didn't say that, but fortunately, you did say that.
Yeah, no, it calls to mind some historical things.
It calls to mind people who do experiments on children, but I won't go further because your program might be canceled forever.
Yeah.
So I'll just leave it at that.
This might be Japanese
Let's-
level even.
Let's show just really quickly, because this is what's going on. Gaza is now blackout. Gaza, as bombs are being dropped. Israel right now, they just hit a high-rise building, one of the tallest buildings in Gaza. Take a look at this. Now, there was a worry, Professor Finkelstein, that once this pushback took place, this action on Saturday morning, that Israel was just going to wipe it clean. What are they? The term is called mowing the lawn, right? I believe is the term when they just go in there and bomb the hell out of the place. But this has come back. Hamas threatens to execute civilian hostages and air each execution via television. Dan Cohen had just mentioned the Palestinian resistance just announced that if Israeli bombardment of civilian homes without warning continues, it will begin to execute captives one by one and publish the videos for all to see. Hamas has more than 100 Israelis held captive. Israeli society simply won't be able to handle the psychological pressure of watching these executions. If Israel wants to save its citizens' lives, it must negotiate. No amount of bombing can change this. And he put down,
Won't they?
checkmate is what he put down.
I don't think it's a checkmate. You think they won't let them people die and go ahead and?
I don't
wreck a
know,
terrible
but we do
nation?
see a lot of chaos now at the airport with a lot of Israelis trying to leave the country. I don't know if they have the stomach to deal with this. They've never been under this type of pressure before. I think the Israeli citizens. That's why when people had talked about the festival that they raided, I mean, it was on the other side of the Gaza fence. How can you be so naive as to think that you're going to be safe there, that attack could never happen upon you? You're right on the other side of the fence. You're not in Tel Aviv.
Ukraine.
I know. But Professor Finkelstein, what are your thoughts about this as far as...
I'm going to. Thank you. Yeah.
Good.
If you go back to like 2007, and you look at the Israeli government statements about what they were going to do to Gaza just before Operation Cast Lead, I can assure you, because I quote them at length in my book on Gaza, I can assure you they made the identical statements as they made today. Now, you might ask, well, then why didn't they do back then what they did today? And the answer is very, very simple. It's because international public opinion reined them in. There were some restraints, not a lot. But Gaza lived to see another day. Why do I say this? Because all of those people from Matt Getz to Marjorie Taylor Moore.
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Marjorie Taylor Greene. I'm thinking of Mary Tyler Moore.
Sorry.
She's spinning around in the city of.
My age away. From Matt Getz and Marjorie Taylor Greene, all the way to AOC and Bernie Sanders, and in the middle, Chuck Schumer and Tulsi
Gabbard.
and Tulsi Gabbard and Nikki Haley. They bear the burden. They could rein in Israel. Israel can be stopped if international public opinion bore down on Israel. Israel is not an island. It lives in the world. And the pressure on it can become unbearable. The statements that you read this evening, all of them, every one is prosecutable in the International Criminal Court. Everyone could haul these monsters before the court. So the institutions are there to stop them. And it's the green light that's been given them by our Congress and our elected officials. They bear the responsibility, not primary, but certainly not tertiary, at least secondary responsibility for the annihilation of the people of Gaza.
Yeah.
Every one of them should be held accountable for every child that's starved to death, for every infant who dies because of a lack of water. Today, according to a friend of mine who's generally very reliable, they bombed the incubator center in Al-Shifa Hospital. I actually have a little connection to Gaza. After one of the annihilatory attacks, I raised $100,000 for one of the hospitals, and they put up a plaque at my request to the memory of my parents in that hospital in Gaza. And my guess is, knowing Israel as I do, that hospital is no longer there. And that is, we have to say, I won't say primary responsibility, but certainly secondary responsibility, culpability, is that of all those people who you cited, because Israel can be reined in. All the United States has to say is, Mr. Netanyahu, Mr. Defense Minister, if the case goes before the International Criminal Court, sorry, we're not going to support you. We're not going to block the prosecution. And I dare say, having studied international law and having studied prosecutions in that court, it's actually an awful court, but that's beside the point, there is quite sufficient evidence to bring back a guilty verdict.
Can I ask a question? Does Israel belong? You know how we don't belong to that court because otherwise we could get prosecuted for what we did in Iraq. So back around then we withdrew for the Hague Invasion Act. Bush signed that if we ever brought on trial, anyone will invade the Hague. Is Israel a part of it, or do they take? It seems like they do whatever we do. Like, hey, we can do whatever crimes we want. It seems like it's the same as us.
There is technically a state of Palestine, and the state of Palestine does belong to the International Criminal Court, and the state of Palestine has twice brought cases before the criminal court on the basis of Israel conduct in the occupied territories, and also when it attacked the humanitarian flotilla in 2010.
Yeah.
May 31st, 2010.
Yeah.
So technically, yes, it can be prosecuted. And if the United States says, we're not going to protect you, I think Israel will think twice.
Yeah.
It's the impunity. It's the impunity granted this government and country by the United States in particular, but also the EU, that enables it to carry on like Mongol hordes, because it's exactly what they are. It's Genghis Khan, it's Mongol hordes. But they couldn't do that without the impunity granted them by all the people you quoted this evening.
Professor Finkelstein, the last thing I want to talk about before we get you out of here is the geopolitical ramifications in which this situation could spin out of control into, because I don't think a lot of people understand what this means. I presented this scenario where, Israel obviously is trying to, what I see, goad America into a war against Iran. And we heard what Lindsey Graham said. We understand there's a relationship between Iran and Russia, and how badly that situation could just spin out of control, where you have two major powers attacking each other. This is the comment by the Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova on the sharp escalation of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Russia is gravely concerned over a sharp escalation of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. In this we would like to reaffirm our principled and consistent stance that this conflict, which has continued for 75 years, cannot be resolved by force and can be settled exclusively by political and diplomatic means, by engaging in a full-fledged negotiation process based on the well-known international legal framework stipulating the establishment of an independent Palestinian state within the 1967 borders, with a capital in East Jerusalem that coexists with Israel in peace and security. We regard that the current large-scale escalation as another extremely dangerous manifestation of a vicious circle of violence resulting from chronic failure to comply with the corresponding resolutions of the UN and its Security Council, and the blocking by the West of the work of the Middle East Quartet of international mediators made up of Russia, the United States, the EU, and the UN. We call on the Palestinian and Israeli sides to implement an immediate ceasefire, renounce violence, exercise restraint, and begin, with the assistance of the international community, a negotiation process aimed at establishing a comprehensive, lasting, and long-awaited peace in the Middle East. Now, one thing I really noticed from this whole situation is I think that they're kind of quoting international law when they talk about the 1967 borders, but they're also, in my mind, implicating the fact that this siege and this blockade of Gaza is illegal. And, it's obvious the position they have taken over here. What are your thoughts on Russia's statement when it comes to Palestine?
To be perfectly frank with you, that is an excellent statement. You know what? It's surprisingly excellent, because it says everything that needs to be said.
Yeah.
Namely, number one, there has been for 50 years, I told you at the beginning, I can't go through the whole history. There has been for 50 years a framework for resolving the conflict. And all parties, except for the United States, now it's a little wavering, the European countries, and I will grant, because I am confident the truth is on the side of justice. So I'm not afraid of the truth. That Hamas, Hezbollah rejected that framework. Now, first let me state the framework, and then I'll tell you what Hamas and Hezbollah have had to say. The framework is very simple, exactly what she said. That was an elegant, precise, accurate statement. She said the framework is 2 states on the June 1967 border. She is accurate that the entire world community embraced that formula, with the exception of the United States. And it's not a state. Hamas, up until 2006, when it got elected, yes, it opposed that framework. There seemed to be reasonable possibilities in 2006 that its position would evolve. When Hezbollah was asked about that framework, the leader of Hezbollah, Syed Nasrallah, he said, "We don't support it. However, if that's what the Palestinians want, we won't stand in the way." The state of Iran has repeatedly voted in the UN to resolve the conflict on those terms being, and you were very perceptive in your comment. I compliment you on your mental acuity. They framed their response in the terms of international law. That's what the law says. The chief lawbreakers, indeed the only lawbreakers, are the United States and the state of Israel, who refuse the terms for now a half century to resolve the conflict diplomatically and allow all parties to live in peace. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
I have to say that was a remarkably succinct, lucid, and what's most important, accurate account of how we got here on this day.
Yeah.
The U.S. and Israel refuse or thumb their nose at international law because Israel will not accept that Palestinians have the same right to self-determination, the same right to breathe. Because, to quote that Israeli official, they're all human animals. That's the problem.
Yeah.
The Israeli Ubermenschen, the supermen who have such contempt for the Palestinians and for Arabs in general. And I would say, at the end, if you'll allow me a small digression, and then we'll end it. My mother and father were in the Warsaw Ghetto. They were there until the uprising. And periodically there was the 40th anniversary of the uprising, the 30th anniversary, and my mother would be interviewed because she was one of the survivors. And she tended to downplay the significance of the uprising. She said it's so exaggerated. We only had a few guns. We were up against the German army. If the Soviet Red Army couldn't defeat the Germans, do you think a few starving Jews in the ghetto could? So she said it's so exaggerated. And once a person interviewed her, a friend of mine at the time, and said, but is there anything redemptive from that event? And my mother thought hard, and she said, you know what? The human ingenuity that those fighters displayed, because remember, the ghetto was filled with catacombs, tunnels. They were called bunkers. And the bunkers were dug by hand. They had only the most primitive implements. And my mother said it was a real credit to human ingenuity what these young people did. And now I will say something else, which might get the wrath of God, speaking as an atheist, the wrath of God on me. You cannot help but admire and respect the ingenuity of the people of Gaza. Remember, Gaza is smaller than a postage stamp. You know, it is the most surveilled place on God's earth. All of the super technology that Israel brought to bear, or has brought to bear, to probe every nook and cranny in Gaza. And it's such a small space. And yet, they managed to plot a very complex operation under these very strange circumstances.
Like prisoners. Prisoners got nothing to do but make a plan all day.
I know, but there's one difference. It's prisoners who are being surveilled 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, with the most sophisticated surveillance technology known to date to humankind. It's a credit, I believe. It's a credit to human ingenuity, and it's also a credit to the thirst, the unquenchable thirst for freedom. So, at this point, acknowledging all the horrors that occurred, I respect that achievement of the people of Gaza. Now, I know people are going to go berserk and bonkers over what I said, but I will remind them John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave. We celebrate the man who, in his fanaticism, committed significant atrocities because he was so committed to the ending of slavery, which he considered an inextinguishable sin. And I think we should also honor, even though a lot of quote unquote, I will drop the quote unquote, a lot of innocent blood was spilled, we should honor the right of the people of Gaza, the slaves of Israel, who have risen in revolt and who realistically will quite likely perish. I, for one, honor that memory the same way as I sing John Brown's body lies moldering in the grave. The God above in heaven looks kindly down. And I believe, as a resolute atheist notwithstanding, the God above in heaven looks kindly down on the last desperate effort of the people of Gaza to free themselves from that concentration camp.
Professor Finkelstein, thank you so much for joining us today. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time. I don't know if you know this, but I grew up in Boca Raton, South Florida. I moved to New York when I was a young kid. My graduating class was about 85% Jewish, and I had a lot of mentors that were pro-Zionist. And when it came to this subject, I hid for quite a while. I didn't want to talk about it. I thought it was too controversial. But after what happened on Saturday, I thought it would be a good point a good time to stop hiding, because I think it's desperate times, and I don't want to see a genocide take place because a lot of us were silent. And I thank you for coming on and having this conversation with us here on the Jimmy Dore Show. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
We'll see you soon. Professor Finkelstein, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey, come see us on tour. We're going to be in Dallas, Houston, San Diego, Bloomington, Illinois, Indianapolis, and Levittown, New York. Wow, that's a lot of dates. See you there.